Can you only imagine if that little spoiled brat Dudley Dursley was actually accepted to Hogwarts? One of the reasons Harry Potter's Aunt Petunia was so cold towards him was due to the fact that his mother Lily basically got to live the dream of being a witch, while Petunia was born with no magical powers. Then Harry's off to Hogwarts to enjoy and learn all about the beauty that is magic, while her son Dudley was in the exact same position she was in. Not that he cared so much anyway. Now, it's a topic that I touched base on in a previous video a few years back, but today's video is different. Today's video is about going into great detail on how events would have changed had Dudley Dursley been accepted to Hogwarts. It still doesn't feel right saying those words, does it? But how would he be treated? What house would he be sorted into? Gryffindor? Slytherin? Would he still be a bully? Would his attitude change? Well, I'm going to address all of those questions in the forthcoming video. So with that being said, welcome back to the world of Harry Potter, everyone. Dudley Dursley is a wizard, he's going to Hogwarts, and it's time to discuss how everything changes. Enjoy the video. Okay everyone, let's get started. So here's the thing, this all begins with Petunia. We need to look at things from her perspective in order to understand how big a deal this is for her with Dudley being born magical. Okay, so Petunia didn't mistreat Harry for no reason. She had, in her mind, a very valid reason for her coldness towards her nephew. Her behaviour, however, was still so wrong on so many levels, and in my opinion she should have been given jail time, but that's not here or there. What's in front of us is that valid reason, and I say that with air quotes because it's only valid in her mind. That reason was jealousy. Out and out jealousy of her sister, Harry's mother, Lily. Lily had been born with the gift of magic. Lily got to go to Hogwarts and study magic. She got to become a first-rate witch, experience the wizarding world and have an extraordinary life. Petunia, born from the same parents, had all the opportunities Lily was given, yet she was the one who didn't get the magical gift. She was the one who had to settle for mediocrity, and she heavily resented Lily for that. It wasn't fair. And you know what guys, maybe it wasn't fair on Petunia, but how she handled herself in the coming years robbed her of any sympathy from the reader. So upset at the thought of Lily going to Hogwarts and not her too, that Petunia even wrote to Albus Dumbledore asking him for permission to attend, to which the headmaster gently rebuffed her request due to the simple fact she had no magic within her. This hardened Petunia. It hardened her to the point where she turned her back on anything magical and looked at Lily with heavy animosity and bitterness. She transferred that bitterness onto Lily's son Harry when taking custody of him after his mother's death. It's the sole reason why she spoiled Dudley beyond any measurable account and gave Harry nothing. She wanted to make Harry feel how she felt all those years ago. Over the years, Petunia notices flashes of magic around Dudley, but puts it down to Harry being so near. So you can imagine her shock and bewilderment to receive not one, but two Hogwarts letters in the door. One for Harry and one for Dudley. After the initial amazement of what she held in her hand had sank in, Petunia would be absolutely bursting with pride that her son, her Dudley, would be going to Hogwarts, that this was the universe making things right for all the pain and disappointment she felt within herself for so many years. Can you imagine it, Vernon? A Dursley attending Hogwarts. My boy, my son, a wizard, magical. He'll be great, you know, says Vernon. Didn't think you were the only one, boy, did you? Directed at Harry, who, having no knowledge of magic, the wizarding world, or his heritage, is thinking, what is Hogwarts? They've all gone mad. Petunia, only realising that Harry had no knowledge of anything, would then have to sit him down and explain the truth about what really happened, that his mother and father were a wizard and a witch, that they were killed protecting him, and that he and Dudley are wizards and are going to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. So the whole ordeal of burning Harry's letters and hiding everything from him, that wouldn't have happened. Which means the Dursleys wouldn't have moved away from Privet Drive in the first place, and Hagrid wouldn't have needed to go look for Harry in order to inform him he was a wizard and that he was going to Hogwarts. Now they'd all attend Diagon Alley as a four-piece, and Petunia would be completely stunned at the high shopping street. It was all she ever wanted to see, all she ever wanted to experience, and here she was, with her son, about to spend an absolute fortune on making sure that her boy would have everything. Now the first thing she'd buy Dudley would be a statement purchase. The Nimbus 2000, the fastest broom in the world, directly in the bag for her boy. To many a head turn, and to a smug look on Dudley's face. Hagrid would also arrive in the alley to introduce himself to Harry and help him with his shopping, as he had Harry's bank vault key. And don't forget, I'm sure Dumbledore didn't feel Harry would be treated as equally as his cousin, and he was right. Dudley's wand, I believe, would be cherry wood, for his own desire to be lethal with a weapon, and the core would be unicorn hair, as it was not prone to mishandling and also not prone to performing dark spells very well. Dudley was annoying, and he was jealous of Harry, but he wasn't evil. Now, here's the thing. Petunia's attitude could go one of two ways. She could warm up to Harry a little. She'd realise that when it comes to Muggleborns, that it really is a lottery. Dudley is just as magical as Harry, and has every chance to possibly even better his cousin at wizardry. The second way actually stems from a previous sentence. Petunia could become overly concerned with pushing Dudley to beat Harry in all of his subjects, and be even colder to Harry, try to alienate him in order to give her son the advantage. Harry's mother may have achieved more than her sister, but that wouldn't be happening with the current generation, not on Petunia's watch. But guys, I'll ask you yourself to decide what route you believe Petunia would go down. Let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, moving on. At King's Cross, Harry and Dudley both notice Molly Weasley instructing her children to run through the platform and follow her lead, like Harry originally did in the original timeline, and he'd meet Ron along the way. On board the Hogwarts Express, it's only fitting that Dudley and Harry would share a carriage. He'd make insults about Harry's robes, questioning where Harry would have gotten the money to afford brand new everything. New robes, shoes, books, an owl, adding that he knows his parents certainly wouldn't have paid for it. Ron would then immediately take a disliking to Dudley. The same situation would have occurred with Hermione entering the carriage, making acquaintances as she originally did. During the sorting ceremony, Hermione, Ron and Harry would all be sorted into Gryffindor as normal. At this point, Dudley would become a little nervous as the only 3 students he'd spoken to were all sorted into one house. He wouldn't want to be on his own. Although he bullies Harry and gives him a hard time, he'd rather bully close to home. So what house would he be in? Well, he wouldn't make Slytherin because of his Muggle-born status. He wasn't the most intelligent person in the world either. He was spoiled, self-centered, and would probably sell anyone over if it meant he could get ahead. Therefore, that would rule out Ravenclaw, and it would rule out Hufflepuff. Dudley did crave attention and glory. He did value bravery. He wanted to display it, similar to how Peter Pettigrew did. So I feel he'd be sorted into Gryffindor, along with his cousin. I know there's going to be a few of you who will disagree, but out of all of the houses, Hufflepuff is the least suitable for Dudley. So please hold back the Hufflepuff comments that I feel many of you are going to give. As I said, he'd rather pester Harry than anyone else, as it's easier. The dysfunctional relationship is already established, and he'd want to appear stronger than Harry. He would want to be a better wizard, or at least appear as one. Dudley would also be present during several of Draco Malfoy and Harry's confrontations, in public support of Draco, which the latter would notice. I wouldn't rule out Dudley spying on Harry for Draco at some point either. He'd also try out for Quidditch on his Nimbus 2000, probably wanting to show off, although he'd struggle due to him not being the most athletic person. He'd still lie about it to his parents and tell them that Quidditch was too boring or something along those lines, it just wasn't for him. During the Christmas period, Harry, hating everything about Privet Drive and the people that lived there, would prefer to stay at school, while Dudley would be whisked home to his doting mother and father, who are eagerly awaiting his verdict on his first semester in Hogwarts. I also believe Dudley would actually struggle on returning to the school after the break. He was a spoiled little brat who had everything done for him: his cooking, his cleaning, his ironing, his laundry, his bed being made. The boy had no self-discipline. Even with Harry's defeat of Voldemort at the end of the school year, Dudley, after aiding the trio in the smallest and simplest of ways, like distracting a teacher or opening a door or something, would paint a heroic picture to his parents that he helped fight off the Dark Lord, to which Petunia and Vernon would hail their son as a brave hero, and it was no surprise he was a Gryffindor. Anyway guys, with that being said, that is my take on what would happen if Dudley Dursley was actually a wizard and how year 1 would play out. Welcome back guys, and thank you for the support of the What If series. So let's get to it. After his defeat of Voldemort and Professor Quirrell, Harry has gained even more fame after his heroics this time round, especially for being so inexperienced. Upon the cousins' return to Privet Drive, Dudley tells his mum all about his eventful year in Hogwarts and how he helped Harry save the day, even though all he really did was distract the teacher. Harry actually does acknowledge his cousin's help, and as you'd expect, Petunia makes a huge deal about her son being a hero, and scolding Harry for putting him in such a dangerous position, before sarcastically adding, "Even the great Harry Potter couldn't do it without my boy," for Vernon to add, "You mean he couldn't do it without a Dursley?" Dudley is as smug as ever, lapping up all the attention as usual, as Harry just rolls his eyes and lets his cousin have his moment. It's such a typical Dudley thing to do, believing his own hype. Anyway, just when things seem to return to normal with the boys both being back home, Dobby shows up and, as in the original timeline, warns Harry that he cannot return to Hogwarts as it's too dangerous to do so. He also says it's not safe for Dudley either, as being a close relative of Harry puts him in danger as well. This does concern Harry, as he doesn't want to see his cousin get hurt on his behalf. Dudley aggressively tells the elf that he's not stopping him going back to school, and Harry just requests if Dobby could tell him what the threat is. Now, there's many scenarios that could happen with Dobby arriving and both boys being wizards, but I'm going to stick to the original events with Vernon's potential business partner arriving and the evening pretty much being ruined thanks to Dobby's intervention. With Petunia and Vernon demanding an explanation to such ludicrous behaviour, Dudley, being a mummy's boy, would tell them everything that Dobby had just warned them about, particularly that their lives were in danger. Petunia herself would have a complete meltdown at the thought of any harm coming to her precious son, and Vernon wouldn't be too far behind it with his own comments. "You won't be going back, either of you. I won't allow it," he shouts. Harry is absolutely furious at Dudley for telling his parents, especially as they've now been banned from returning to the school. Dudley won't be bold enough to stage a breakout and make his way back to school, so he's not exactly kept prisoner. Harry's bedroom window is barred in as it was originally. The Weasleys come as they have in the original timeline also, and they're about to pull the bars off the window. Dudley would burst into Harry's room and tell them all to stop, to move the car around to his bedroom and they can all come. Ron interrupts and says Dudley can make his own way, that they didn't come for him. Dudley begs Harry to take him, and Harry reluctantly agrees. Vernon and Petunia sleep through the whole thing and are in for a very big shock the next morning. When they arrive at the Weasleys, Molly is as welcoming as always, but is rather concerned that Dudley has directly disobeyed his parents. She sends them a letter by Owl informing them that she will take Dudley to Diagon Alley on September 1st and requests that they meet her there in order to take their son home with them, or if they wish to send him to Hogwarts themselves. Molly knows that the Dursleys aren't nice people, but she's a little more lenient with Harry from his harsh experience growing up in their household. Dudley is their son, and she has to inform his parents of his whereabouts. Dudley is also allowed to remain in the burrow until they leave for the alley, and in a responding letter to Molly, Petunia actually thanks her for contacting her and ensuring her son's well-being. The entire family make their way to Diagon Alley via the Flu network, and surprisingly enough, Dudley ends up in the right area of the alley, unlike Harry, who ended up in Borgin and Burke. Petunia and Vernon are waiting at Flourish and Blotts as Dudley arrives with Molly and the rest of her family. He hugs his parents tight as Petunia sheds tears. She was worried sick about him. She's just grateful he's okay, rather than angry he left without telling her. She has a brief conversation with Molly, thanking her for what she's done, and warning her off any further association with her troublesome nephew, who's nowhere to be seen. I'm not surprised he's on the missing list once again, probably off causing some mischief. Let's just hope he doesn't get himself blown up like my sister did. Molly sternly looks at Petunia and says, "Look after your boy, Mrs. Dursley." Ron then mutters, "Told you they were awful, Mum." The Dursleys reluctantly allow Dudley to return to Hogwarts after he begins to throw a tantrum. Petunia then follows up with a letter to Dumbledore, warning him that both Harry and Dudley's lives have been threatened, and her belief that a possible plot is at hand to harm Dudley at Harry's expense. Harry then sees Draco in Flourish and Blotts, and he runs into Lucius Malfoy with Dudley by his side. Lucius looks Dudley up and down, as if he's examining him, and then lifts his books from his cauldron and makes a comment on how surprised he is that a muggle-born such as Dudley has such good condition books, and slips the diary back in with them. Dudley is rather speechless as he looks at Lucius, a man who's quite intimidating at best. Because he keeps eye contact with him the whole time, he doesn't notice Lucius slipping the diary back into his cauldron. Afterwards, with both sets of parents at King's Cross Station, Dobby doesn't close the barrier as he originally did. Petunia and Vernon make sure Dudley and Harry go through, and Molly sends her children through before following them. It's too risky for the elf to close the barrier in the manner he did in the original timeline. Everyone safely boards the train to Hogwarts this time round. Nothing substantial happens on board. Harry is still pretty angry at Dudley for telling his parents about the potential danger they could be placed in. He's already watched and followed by enough people, and now there's possibly more attention placed on him. As the students all return to Hogwarts, Harry is excited about getting back to Quidditch. Dudley would have been quite jealous of Harry's role in the team, given that he's in no way as athletic as his cousin, nor will he ever be. Still, Dudley has always dreamed of being a Quidditch star for the Gryffindor team. With Gilderoy Lockhart becoming the new defense against the dark arts teacher, Dudley was worse than Hermione Granger for obsessing over him. But all the things he's done, the creatures he's fought, the spells he must know, Dudley would say. During the first and only dueling club lesson, Dudley took so much pleasure out of seeing his cousin get struck by Draco's offensive attack, especially Harry's landing. He goes on to add that he always knew there was something strange about his cousin when Harry spoke Parseltongue for the first time in front of the entire year, and that even his mum said it too. With the diary in his possession, Dudley soon discovers that it replies back to him. As Ginny Weasley did in the previous timeline, Dudley begins telling the diary how difficult it is being the cousin of Harry Potter, and how he thinks his mum plays up to the smallest of his achievements. He goes on to add that even though he knows what his mum is doing, it still makes him feel better. He doesn't know why he's mean to Harry so much of the time, he just is. The diary plays up to Dudley's feelings, appearing understanding and wanting to know more about what Dudley feels. The boy also tells the diary that he wants to be the leader of Gryffindor and show Harry what it's like to be in someone else's shadow, failing to understand that Harry didn't actually want anyone in his shadow. Harry just wanted to be normal. The purpose of the diary is to draw the magic and life out of the writer, and this begins to work quite fast on Dudley. He's the one who writes the message on the wall about the Chamber of Secrets being reopened. As the students become petrified and Dumbledore is removed from his position along with Hagrid being sent to Azkaban, it becomes apparent that Lucius's plan was to publicly embarrass Harry, and what better way than having his own cousin be responsible for opening the Chamber of Secrets and unleashing its monster upon the unworthy. It seems a lot more scandalous than Ginny Weasley discrediting Arthur, if you ask me. Dudley seems to be the perfect candidate because he's Muggle-born, which makes him very high risk to be petrified, so there's not a lot of people who are going to suspect him of doing anything out of sort. Harry was also still believed to be the heir of Slytherin, so the focus was still on him. The thing is, however, as Dudley didn't know he was being controlled by the diary, he was actually terrified of the monster of Slytherin, and he wouldn't leave the common room most days. I think it's quite an interesting view of his character. He's consciously afraid of the monster he's subconsciously allowing out of the chamber. It was only when another student mentioned it to Harry that Dudley was seen walking the halls in a trance-like state, just ignoring people, did he realise that something wasn't right with his cousin. Harry rushed to the common room bedroom and looked through Dudley's belongings, coming across the diary with the name Tom Marvolo Riddle on the front cover. When writing it, he would be taken back into Tom Riddle's memory and would see what happened as he originally did, with Hagrid being framed and Myrtle Warren's body being removed from the school. So that means the story with Ron and Harry finding Lockhart and going down to the chamber happens as it normally did, because it's still the same layout, but with Dudley in it. Harry is shocked beyond belief to find that his cousin Dudley is lying there, ice cold and almost drained of life, just as we seen Ginny was. Tom Riddle reveals himself to Harry as he had and informs him of his disgust at having to associate himself with a filthy Muggleborn. He does go on to say that he had great pleasure siphoning the magic Dudley stole out of his body and into his. He should have never had the magic in his blood in the first place, and this was the perfect way for Voldemort to restore his own power, taking Dudley's life along with his magic. So as we know, Harry kills the basilisk, then the phoenix tears and saves the day. We know all that. Dudley wakes up in the infirmary and is looked upon as a hero, even though he remembers absolutely nothing that happened. Upon Dumbledore and Hagrid's return, Dudley claims responsibility for playing a part, fabricating the risk he took in the events that had happened. With that being said, everyone, that is Dudley Dursley's second year in Hogwarts done and dusted. I really hope you enjoyed it because I put a ton of work into it. I did not want to cover every single nook and cranny of the book, but you know, just the overall concept fitting Dudley in. Dudley Dursley is back for his third year at Hogwarts. The last 2 years have been a crazy whirlwind for Harry Potter's cousin since he found out he was a wizard. He's now a year older. I've inserted him into the Prisoner of Azkaban story, and we're going to see what happens this time round. If you haven't watched Dudley's first and second year videos, then please do so by clicking the links in the description below, then come back to this one. If you have watched them, then don't go anywhere, because Dudley Dursley and the Prisoner of Azkaban happens now. Enjoy. Welcome back, guys, it's year 3, let's do this. So, Dudley and Harry are just about over the events of what happened during their second year at Hogwarts. Well, I won't exactly say over what happened because it was pretty traumatic if I'm honest, but they are getting on with things. However, Vernon and Petunia are not. Vernon in particular is furious at what happened. The thoughts of his son having his life drained, moments away from death. He's trying to figure out some way to sue the Ministry or make someone pay for what happened. He's threatening to get Dumbledore fired. Harry tries to explain to his uncle that there has never been a wizard like Voldemort before. He's done things with magic nobody has ever imagined or seen, and going to school at Hogwarts is a risk. That's the risk of practicing magic. Vernon continues to rant and calls Dumbledore an incompetent idiot. Harry then reminds him of what happened the last time he insulted the Hogwarts headmaster, to which Vernon responds with a distasteful look. He warns Harry and Dudley that things better remain quiet this summer and no trouble will be brought upon their doorstep. Petunia, on the other hand, isn't angry. She's been relatively quiet, trying to process the fact that Dudley was almost killed. It has quite a negative effect on her, and she doesn't know how she's going to cope with him going back again this time round. Aunt Marge's visit goes exactly as it did in the original timeline. She insults Harry, starts to blow up, Dudley gets a button to the head, Marge floats out the window, and it's a pretty hilarious scene if you ask me. Vernon is once again having a meltdown. He's a right mind not to let either of the boys go back to Hogwarts with yet another catastrophe happening, his sister floating away down the street for the whole world to see. Dudley arrogantly says that he'll gladly defend Hogwarts from any attack, just like he did last year. Harry looks at his cousin in disgust and can't believe the words that actually came out of his mouth after everything that happened between them last year. Squaring up to Dudley, wand in hand, he tells him that he's no idea how lucky he is to be able to go to Hogwarts. It's a privilege and should be treated as such. Harry goes on to say that Dudley is nothing but a fraud, trying to claim responsibility for saving the school. He reminds Dudley that they once knew a wizard who took credit for other wizards' work, and things didn't turn out too well for him. Dudley quickly backs down, realising that Harry did have a point about what happens to Lockhart, but still, Dudley was a victim of Voldemort in his eyes, and he survived. Harry can't take any more of the strain that the Dursleys put on his life. He packs his things as he originally did, leaves the house, and gets picked up by the night bus, which takes him to the Leaky Cauldron. Back at Privet Drive, Dudley admits that maybe he shouldn't have gone on how he did. Harry did save him after all. Petunia interrupts and tells him that's nonsense. She commends him for standing up to Harry and not letting him hog the spotlight all the time. Maturity beyond your years, my boy. Maturity beyond your years. Dudley and Harry next see each other at King's Cross Station. A crude look from his aunt tells Harry everything he needs to know, while his uncle just gives him a nod that Harry doesn't know what to think of. It was almost like a watch over Dudley nod, if that's what a nod could give off. I think Vernon could have played up to his wife's view of things just to keep her happy and show support, but deep down, he knew that Harry would still make sure Dudley was okay. On the train, Dudley finds some of his friends who visit Harry's compartment. His cousin makes a smart remark about being the one to save Harry once again, to which Harry replies, "You can't really do much when you're half dead at the bottom of a chamber, can you? I wonder where you'll end up this year." Harry is furious that Dudley would come and taunt him, especially after their last encounter. Hermione tells Harry that was really mean, to which Harry replies that he deserved it. "That's the difference. He's mean. You're not," she said. The Dementors then board the train as they did in the original scene, which is quite a daunting moment, and Dudley turns pale at the thought of the creatures coming into his own cabin. He's terrified, as self-preservation has always been his priority over anything. At Hogwarts, Dudley once again exaggerates the situation as he confirms Draco's lie that Harry fainted, shouting loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're right. Draco was right. I seen Harry faint. I seen it myself," he says. "Don't you speak to me," Draco lashes out. "You're still a filthy mudblood." Dudley sits down, realising he'll never be taken seriously by Malfoy or any of the other Slytherins. With news of Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban, Dudley makes cruel jibes towards Harry, especially as Black was believed to be a close associate of Voldemort's. He'd feign concern for his own parents if Black was to ever roam free in the wizarding world, which angers Harry even more because he knows that Dudley knows how much of a sensitive topic Harry's parents is. During the Care for Magical Creatures lesson, Draco encourages Dudley not to let Harry steal the spotlight yet again, and Dudley volunteers with Buckbeak. Everything goes as it should. Dudley gets the flight of his life with a hippogriff. This prompts Draco to want to experience the same flight Dudley had, and as seen in the original timeline, he gets a nasty scratch from the hippogriff. Dudley rubs it in when he's able to go to Hogsmeade Village, and Harry can't, especially as they live under the same household, with his parents signing his consent form and not Harry's. Professor McGonagall hears this information and asks Harry if it's true, that the Dursleys wouldn't sign his consent form. When he tells her it is, McGonagall hesitates for a moment, considering whether to permit Harry to go anyway, but chooses not to bend the rules despite the situation being so unfair on the boy. Even though Dudley was a bully, he still showed signs of him actually being somewhat decent. He liked the Hippogriff Buckbeak and was quite upset when he heard the news of the creature's impending execution. It makes him realise that Draco Malfoy was mean to the core, whereas Dudley just wanted to be liked and praised even if it meant being mean. On the last day of Buckbeak's life, Dudley follows Harry, Ron and Hermione to Hagrid's hut where the execution is taking place. He's present when Scabbers bites Ron and runs off. He watches as the large dog drags Ron down the hole under the willow tree. As Harry and Hermione are both caught up in the tree's branches, Dudley runs for the opening and gets through, before Harry and Hermione shortly follow. When it's apparent that Sirius Black is actually the Black Dog, Dudley cowers in fear and hides at the back of the trio, obviously to be the last in the firing line should the crazed killer decide to continue his killing spree from 12 years ago. As the truth is actually revealed that Sirius was actually innocent of his crimes, everyone makes their way back through the passageway to turn Wormtail in. Dudley witnesses Remus's transformation into a werewolf and Peter Pettigrew escape in his rat form. Dudley then tries to run but gets struck by the willow tree. Harry, feeling responsible for him, would help him up and receive an assist from Sirius. It's only then that the Dementors attack, and the Dursley boy is far too inexperienced to defend himself from the dark creatures. Harry is completely overrun and notices that it's Dudley's soul that's moments from being absorbed and not the soul of Sirius. The three are saved by the mysterious person from the other side of the lake, and Dudley narrowly escapes with his life. He was almost subject to the Dementor's kiss. The events of what happened really was an eye-opener for Dudley. He realised just how close he'd come to being seriously hurt, even more so than last year. He also realised what his cousin had lost, but Dudley's self-serving nature still outweighed any compassion he may have begun to feel for Harry. That's 2 years in a row that Dudley and his cousin had come seriously close to losing their lives. Harry makes Dudley swear that he will not open his mouth about Remus or Sirius, and for once, Dudley actually complies without objection. At the end of the year, they head back to Privet Drive with less of a mind to tell Petunia and Vernon the full scale of events. Welcome back, guys. It's time for Dudley's 4th year at Hogwarts to begin. We've got the Triwizard Tournament, the Goblet of Fire, the Quidditch World Cup, and so much more. So the question is, how influential is Dudley over certain events, or better yet, how involved was he? Well, for starters, I can tell you how not involved he was, and that was the opening scene of the book. Frank Bryce's death happened as it had originally, which obviously causes Harry to wake up from the pain of his scar, as it's an early sign of Voldemort's impending return. So Harry and Hermione are both invited to the Quidditch World Cup by the Weasleys, as they were in the original timeline. This time, however, Harry reluctantly brings Dudley along after feeling guilty over his cousin almost losing his soul to the Dementor's kiss and becoming what would be a shell of a human being. He warns Dudley not to get on anyone's nerves and to be grateful for being able to come due to his past actions. It's not long before Dudley begins complaining about why they have to journey towards a portkey that's so far away. Why are we walking through a ton of trees to get to a boot? It's boring. Hermione rolls her eyes at Dudley as they meet Cedric Diggory and his father Amos. Dudley's boredom soon turns to sheer amazement as they arrive at the Quidditch World Cup campsite with the stadium in view. He can't get over how big the stadium is, the atmosphere, the different fans from all over the world. He's never seen anything like it. He eventually settles and gets into the match. He's also starstruck when he sees how incredible Victor Crumb is. "He's amazing," says Dudley. "You like Crumb?" Ron replies. "Of course, he's the greatest," Dudley says in a soft manner. "You didn't even know who he was 5 minutes ago," Harry mutters. It's the first time in 4 years that Ron and Dudley share anything relatable together, and it actually annoyed Harry because he knew that Dudley was far too self-centered to ever be Ron's friend. When the Death Eater attacks begin, Dudley immediately flees for the forest, caring very little for the safety of the people he was with. He watches from the trees as the dark mark is cast into the sky, and he gets a chill, a feeling that something bad is going to happen. He reunites with Harry a short time later, and they return to the burrow together. The students from Beauxbaton and Durmstrang arrive for the return of the Triwizard Tournament. Dudley is excited to discover that Victor Crumb is with the Durmstrang students. As everyone settles, Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Alistair Moody arrives at Hogwarts to take his position as Defence Against the Dark Arts Professor. Nothing much changes in that situation as it's part of the plot. What's different, however, is that Dudley is witness to him demonstrating the 3 unforgivable curses for the class. He's made feel extremely uneasy at the sight of the Cruciatus curse, and his face turns white as Moody shows how lethal the killing curse can be. Dudley didn't exactly have much confidence in himself as a duelist, but he did study and he wanted to do well. He just couldn't shake the feeling he had that night when he seen the dark mark, and everything pointed towards his cousin. Speaking of which, Dudley still wasn't a fan of Harry. If you look at it, Dudley had 11 years in the same household as Harry. 11 years of absorbing his mother's treatment of Harry, believing he was weird and strange. He still wanted to be better than him, still wanted to outdo him. Something that never really changed was Dudley still being a spoiled brat. Harry had a firebolt, but Dudley had a firebolt supreme, just so he could say he had a faster broom, even though he couldn't use it very well at all. He had a dream to play for the Quidditch team, which was something his cousin was currently living, and it really angered Dudley that he didn't have the skills necessary to do so. Actually, it wasn't even that he didn't have the skill, he was just too lazy to put the work in to actually make the team. It was a lot easier for Dudley to just be envious. When it came round to revealing the Triwizard Champions, Dudley was convinced that Harry put his own name into the Goblet of Fire somehow, and he supported Ron's claim that Harry cheated. He loved having the chance to expand on an opportunity to make Harry's life a misery. It also turns out he was behind the Potter Stinks badges as he supported the real Hogwarts champion, Cedric Diggory. He's seen handing the badges out around the school and takes credit for their creation. Dudley thinks Cedric is incredible and somewhat of a Hogwarts hero, so obviously wants Harry to lose, or worse, be punished for his apparent illegalities. Dudley can't help himself wanting to find out more about what's happening surrounding Harry's participation in the tournament, and starts keeping a closer watch on his cousin. He follows Harry when he goes to meet Hagrid at night and discovers that the first task is dragons. He goes out of his way to inform Krum, Fleur and Cedric that the task involves dragons. He's surprised that Fleur already knows, and Cedric has found out from Harry, but Krum looked upon Dudley with disgust. He knew that the real reason Dudley told him was to make sure Harry had no advantage over anyone else, even though he was his cousin. Krum believed that family was more important than anything, and was aware of Dudley's actions towards Harry, especially from his attempted public humiliation of his cousin. It really bothered Dudley that his hero thought so little of him, which caused him to blame Harry further. On the day of the first task, everything surrounding Harry and the Hungarian Horntail went as it did normally. Dudley watched on as his cousin almost got incinerated, and he cheered on the dragon to inflict as much damage as possible. He was envious of his cousin's skill and knew that he'd never amount to that level. A lot of Dudley's animosity towards Harry was down to his envy of Harry's naturally given talent. He hated how easy flying came to him, how being a seeker seemed effortless, to outfly and outsmart a dragon. He stood in the back during the Gryffindor common room celebrations from Harry, and later scolded Ron for relenting on his original accusations. Harry was just a cheat, and he told his mother so in a letter he sent home by owl. It was actually Vernon who replied to the letter, telling Dudley that his mother simply can't bear the thought of him coming close to any more trouble. Vernon tells Dudley to stay away from Harry and let that be that. Too much has happened already. Dudley just throws the letter down and ignores his parents' directive. During the second task, Dudley didn't have much involvement. He'd actually nothing to go by, and was rather frustrated that he couldn't find out what Harry was up to, and that's because Harry was struggling to find a way to survive underwater. It was basically last minute that Dobby informed Harry about gillyweed. He was present all throughout the second task and was delighted to see his cousin finish last, followed by the disgust that Harry was awarded second place for his outstanding moral fibre, saving more than one host at the bottom of the lake. He follows up with openly stating that Harry Potter continues to cheat, from last place to second. Dudley then even throws in claims of a conspiracy to help Harry win, even though that's what was actually happening. Harry begins to understand just how jealous his cousin truly is. He had 11 years being placed above Harry in Privet Drive, and now Harry is getting the attention and excelling in every way, and the truth of the matter is that Dudley just can't stand it. When it came to the third task, Harry entered the maze as he did originally, as Dudley looked on from the stands just outside. There wasn't much to do other than spectate for this task, but he became involved after Harry returned with Cedric's body. Dudley had never seen a dead body before, let alone someone he went to school with. He pushed himself to the front and watched as his cousin cried frantically over what had happened. Harry then said the words that almost turned Dudley white in the face. Voldemort is back, which means it was a heavy realization that things were gonna change. This was the man that killed Dudley's aunt and uncle, the man that tries to drain Dudley of his life, the man who wanted Harry dead, and now that he's back, he'll be coming for anyone and everyone that's even remotely associated with Harry Potter. Dudley, however, was always the skeptical sort, and a little delusional to the truth. He then began thinking that it's possible Harry was just lying to cover his tracks and Cedric's death, which is absolutely ludicrous, but Dudley's jealousy of Harry has always clouded his judgment. Something that did truly sadden Dudley was Cedric's death. He thought Cedric was cool, he liked him, and genuinely wanted him to win the Triwizard Tournament. It saddened him greatly, and also frightened him that things seemed to be getting worse at Hogwarts. So, we are continuing on with Dudley Dursley's life as a wizard. Voldemort is back, Cedric Diggory is dead, and Harry is all out of sorts. After news of what happened in the graveyard began to spread, there were many who thought Harry was a liar, the Ministry especially. Dudley also believed that his cousin lied about Voldemort's return because he had something to do with Cedric's death and was covering it up. It genuinely angered him. Dudley still had his Muggle friends back home, and he did like to spend time with them, and with Harry's friends basically ignoring him as per Dumbledore's instructions, the playground scene would happen as it originally did. The difference is that Dudley can actually see the Dementors this time, so he knows what's attacking him. However, something that stayed the same was Dudley's ineffectiveness in terms of defending himself. He had no skill whatsoever in how to perform the Patronus charm. It's something that he never learned, and in fairness to Dudley, it wasn't on the curriculum just yet. Harry only learned it through one of the one-on-one lessons with Remus Lupin. So Harry saves Dudley, which is becoming somewhat of a trend at this point, and the two make their way back to Privet Drive. When the letter from Ministry official Mafalda Hopkirk arrives, expelling Harry from Hogwarts, he's puzzled as to why there's been no punishment for Dudley. He was there too, and did actually try to fight them off, even though he didn't use his wand. Suddenly, a second letter arrives moments later, which reads as follows. Dear Mr. Dursley, the Ministry has received intelligence that your location was pinpointed to be in the direct vicinity of a Mr. Harry Potter, who produced underage magic in a Muggle area. As there is no trace of magic from your wand at that particular time, the Ministry will not take action, but we must warn you not to associate with such activities in your future endeavours, as it may harm your credibility going forward. Hoping you are well, Mafalda Hopkirk. Dudley puts the letter down and says, So, that means I'm still allowed at Hogwarts then? Harry can't believe the injustice that's just happened. He saved Dudley's life but gets punished for it. He asks his cousin to testify on his behalf when his appeal hearing is granted. Dudley didn't want to see Harry get expelled, but he's not going to testify. Going on to say that every single time Harry Potter goes back to Hogwarts, something bad happens and someone always gets hurt, or in Cedric's case, killed. At the hearing, Fudge goes on the immediate attack, but delivers quite a detrimental blow when he argues the fact that not even Harry's own cousin, who Harry claims was there with him and attacked by the Dementors, will stand before everyone today to back up Harry's statement. The boy argues that Dudley also received a warning letter, to which Fudge interrupts, telling Harry that the letter said in the vicinity of Harry's location, not side by side, and is completely inadmissible. Harry tries to read out the letter, but Fudge loudly speaks over him and says, Your own cousin, your witness, won't even stand before us all today to clear your name. Must I repeat myself once again, Mr. Potter? Harry tells Fudge that is because Dudley doesn't want him to go back to Hogwarts, that too many bad things happen when he's there, and then goes on to say Dudley is right to not want to testify, but not because of Harry's apparent guilt. Despite what he said, it still really hampers Harry's testimony, and even Dumbledore's intervention is proving ineffective as the facts just don't add up. despite Harry's continued protest that he's innocent. Dumbledore then does something that probably clears everything up and could have cleared Harry in the original timeline. He extracts the memory from Harry's mind, showing evidence of the Dementor attack and Dudley's presence. Fudge immediately tries to shoot this down, stating that the memory could have been tampered with, and that's why the Ministry don't use the Pensieve as a method of retrieving evidence. However, another Ministry official rises to add that, while this may be true, something that can't be tampered with is the individuals who were in the memory, and in this particular memory, it's evident that Dudley Dursley and the Dementors are present. Harry Potter was telling the truth. He's cleared of all charges, much to the Minister's dismay. Dudley isn't happy about his cousin's reinstatement either. Despite what they've both been through together over the last 4 years, Dudley is still against Harry. He'll never support him and is convinced, like half of the school and community, that the boy who lived is also the boy who lies. There could be no way that Voldemort is back. Harry is just trying to cash in on his fame once again. The Daily Prophet have been tearing apart Harry's reputation, and Dudley had given several interviews to the paper about life growing up with his cousin, how Harry always thought he was better than everyone. He also agreed with the claims that Harry was lying about Voldemort's return. Because of his interviews and loud mouth, Dudley begins to get a lot more attention around the school. People want to know more about Harry's past, and Dudley gladly tells them, obviously exaggerating everything to his favour. He also thought that Albus Dumbledore was past his best years and no longer fit to look after the school. It was clear to him that the headmaster was favouring Harry and always had been. He relished the appointment of Dolores Umbridge and believed it was about time there was more structure in Hogwarts. He laughs when Dolores scolds Harry for his claims that Voldemort had returned and tells Harry that apparently he's gotten what he deserved when he notices Harry's hand. He's enjoying life under Umbridge because she kept everyone under close control, especially as she continues to introduce her educational decrees. As Harry forms Dumbledore's army to actually practice and teach defensive magic, he's very untrusting of Dudley, especially after so much betrayal from his cousin over the years. This year in particular, with the public smearing, so he refrains from including Dudley in the army. Dudley would have most likely reported it to Umbridge anyway. However, he can't seem to figure out what Harry was up to when he disappeared for hours on end. He ends up joining the Inquisitorial squad anyway, which doesn't surprise Harry. Umbridge keeps him close, due to his relationship with his cousin, although it's not going to make much of a difference as he'd basically burned his bridges with Harry. The only advantage Dudley has is that he shares a common room with him, so he can track Harry from the off. Draco reluctantly teams up with Dudley, and together they begin closely investigating every student that's closely associated with Harry, starting with the Gryffindors who disappeared from the common room after classes had finished. It wasn't long before they tracked them to the same location, except every student they followed seemed to walk through a door that disappeared after them, frustrating the two boys time and time again. Finally, they inform Umbridge and are present when she blows a massive hole through the wall of the Room of Requirement. They're also witness to Umbridge attempting to use the Cruciatus curse on Harry in order to get the information she wanted. This was a turning point for Dudley, for despite his onslaught and onpour of misery towards Harry, he did not want to see him be tortured and put in harm's way. His stomach churned when Umbridge raised her wand to his cousin. After everything, after nearly having his life drained, after witnessing Remus Lupin transform into a werewolf, after seeing Cedric Diggory's dead body, and after refusing to testify and help his cousin, this was the moment that finally made him switch on. Dudley quite innocently says, "But you're a teacher. You're not supposed to hurt students. I don't understand." To which Umbridge replies her memorable line, "What Cornelius doesn't know won't hurt him." While Harry and Hermione take Umbridge to the forest, Dudley finds out from Neville that they are going to the Ministry to help Sirius. It's at this moment that he realises and accepts that Voldemort may well truly be back. The thing with Dudley is, he knows when he's useful and when he's not. He can barely fly a broom, and actually has no idea how to get to the Ministry. He eagerly waits at Hogwarts as things went down as they did in the original timeline. There just wasn't a justifiable cause to have Dudley at the Ministry anyway. After he becomes aware of what truly happened with Voldemort's return, and how close Harry came to death in addition to what Dumbledore had done to protect him, Dudley finally changes his act and his attitude towards his cousin. He's also saddened over the death of Sirius Black, as he knows how much he meant to Harry. He boards the Hogwarts Express with Harry at the end of the year. He's clearly matured from his experiences last year, and I feel like we might see a different Dudley this time round. Maybe a Dudley whose main focus isn't making his cousin's life a living hell. Dudley Dursley and the Half-Blood Prince is here. It's now. Enjoy. Welcome back everyone, let's get this year up and running. Now I've said that I wouldn't actually try to go on and change the entire story to suit Dudley. I tried to stick to the plot and blend Dudley in naturally, as I've tried to do with my previous videos. So with that being said, you won't see too much of a change in the opening scene of the book. Narcissa Malfoy still goes to Snape's house with her sister Bellatrix and makes the unbreakable vow. Dumbledore still visits Harry in the cafe and takes him to visit Horace Slughorn. That all remains the same. This is the first time that Harry and Dudley didn't actually make their way to King's Cross Station together. Harry is overly concerned about what's going to happen this year, now that it's public knowledge that Voldemort is back. After his realization that his cousin was actually telling the truth all along, Dudley's attitude changed towards Harry. He started to really accept that his vision of Harry was clouded by jealousy for so long. He finally realised that Harry was trying to do the right thing. On board the Hogwarts Express, Dudley pops his head into Harry's compartment. Everything alright? Yeah, fine. Got here safely, I see. Yeah, no trouble. Right then. See you later. Hermione comments how awkward that was, followed by saying that Dudley needs to practice more at being nice because it's not quite believable yet. Back at school, it's Dudley and Harry who find common ground when joking during a free period. He finds it strange that they even had something in common to laugh about. McGonagall scolds the two and suggests that potions class be on the card with Professor Slughorn. When they get to the classroom and obviously have no books, Slughorn instructs them to grab one of the second-hand books in the back. Harry quickly bests his cousin to the newer, nicer book, while Dudley settles for the old, beaten-up copy. Doesn't matter. I'll get Mum to buy me a new one next week. Still showing signs of a smug nature, he's not going to lose it all in one day. Dudley notices how much graffiti covers so many of the text before realising it's actually notes written with what seems like improvements or additional instructions. He then carefully follows the instructions with the written adjustments and actually brews the perfect draft of Living Death, much to everyone's surprise. Even Hermione is furiously jealous that she was bested by Dudley of all people. He wins the liquid look and holds onto it with a big smug smile on his face. This was a big deal for Dudley. He'd never won anything in school and was a pretty average student at best. Dudley had always felt like he was in Harry's shadow since they arrived at Hogwarts. I mean, at least Ron was Harry's best friend and around him all the time. Dudley wasn't. He had always struggled to fit in. He had 11 years of being made feel like he was the most special boy on the planet, and it was only when he left his parents did he realise how much they were overdoing it to compensate growing up with Harry. His blood status would not allow Draco to befriend him, and everyone genuinely liked Harry in Gryffindor, despite some run-ins, so this is a proud moment for him. For once, Dudley was the man at potions. He thought about what he'd use the liquid look for, maybe in another subject, maybe to gain an advantage when flying a broom, since he was so uneasy about taking to the sky. All he knew was, this could be his ticket to his own moment, his own memory, especially as Hermione had told him just how effective liquid luck could be. As the year went on, Dudley carried the book everywhere with him and studied it like it was a Bible. He read ahead in the book to memorise certain potions when tasked with them in class. It puts him at a great advantage in Slughorn's classroom, and he finally gets invited to the Slug Club along with Hermione and Harry. Hermione was doing well in class, as it was in her nature to push herself to excel, and Harry was doing okay, but he was invited mainly because of who he was. However, such success started to cause curiosity between Harry and Hermione, who wanted to know what Dudley was up to and how he was so damn good at potions. Harry tries to think of a plan to separate his cousin from the book, but Hermione is so frustrated at Dudley outperforming her that she just straight up confronts him about his performance in class, and he openly reveals to her and Harry that it's all thanks to the side notes wrote in on the beaten up old book that he was left with. Hermione thinks Dudley's cheating, but Harry disagrees. The original potions, formulas and remedies were adjusted to be better and extremely accurate, and Dudley can't be faulted for using someone else's perfection of what appeared to be a book with some flaws. It's just something they should all get on with. Harry knows Dudley is trying to be a better person and feels like he deserves a chance. No matter how hard Harry tries, he can't seem to get through to Horace Slughorn in order to get him to reveal the true memory, the one that wasn't tampered with. It frustrates Harry that he literally has nothing up his sleeve to gain any sort of advantage in retrieving the information needed. When he returns to the common room, he sits down looking dejected. Dudley approaches him and asks what's happening, and instead of saying nothing, Harry just opens up to his cousin. He explains how dangerous Voldemort is now that he's returned to full power. They've got no way of stopping him, and the slim hope there is of finding out about the root of the Dark Lord's true power lies with Professor Slughorn. Harry says he has to face it. He's all out of luck. Dudley hesitates for a moment and takes the vial of liquid luck out of his pocket, hands it to Harry and says, "Then it's a good thing I've got some to spare." "But that's yours. You earned that," Harry says. "Yeah, I earned it, but you need it. Take it," Dudley replies. This is the final piece of assurance that Harry needs that Dudley is finally on the same page as him. He takes the potion and goes on his way as he did previously in the original timeline. Dudley, meanwhile, wants to act on his newly found confidence and starts to follow Draco Malfoy, especially after his encounter with Harry in the bathroom earlier on in the year. He sees Draco let the Death Eaters into the castle one by one. The sight of Greyback terrifies him, and he's literally frozen stiff. He has no idea where Harry is, or Dumbledore, or anyone that can help him if he's seen. It's a harsh reality for Dudley to understand that bravery and courage means placing yourself in harm's way. As he exits the main castle to check Hagrid's hut, he sees the dark mark being cast into the sky right over the astronomy tower. He stares momentarily before deciding to continue to Hagrid's in search of Harry. Something tells him to look up once again, and he sees something that will never leave his memory. A body that appeared to be launched from the top of the astronomy tower. He couldn't quite make out who it was, but his first instinct told him it was Professor Dumbledore, due to the long hair and beard made out in the moonlight. He made his way over to the body. Maybe the person was still alive. Maybe he could help. As he approached, he seen Dumbledore's lifeless body and felt weak at the knees. For the first time, Dudley truly wanted to leave, go back to Privet Drive, and never come back to Hogwarts or the Wizarding World. But he knew it was way past that. He knew this was an all-out war. If Dumbledore was dead, who was there now to protect the students? What would they do without their headmaster? The only man Voldemort ever feared. Harry knelt down beside the body and looked on in disbelief. This isn't right, thought Dudley. As the students and teachers began to gather, they raised their wands one by one as Dudley joined them. He felt an anger build up inside him, like he wanted to explode. The only thing the Wizarding World has represented for Dudley is pain and misery. At the end of the book, he walks out just as Harry, Ron and Hermione have read the note from Regulus Black. He tells them he wants to help. He doesn't want anyone else to die. He's not going back to school this year. Dudley Dursley is coming on the Horcrux hunt. Well guys, we've gotten to the final year. Dudley's final year at Hogwarts, and I genuinely hope you've all enjoyed the previous 6 videos so far. If you want to go back to the beginning and start from year 1, then you can do so by clicking the links in the description below. It's been a fantastic journey guys, and I've really enjoyed making these videos, but man did it take some time to do. I've been nearly 3.5 weeks putting on these videos together. But anyway, Dudley Dursley is a wizard in his 7th year at Hogwarts. Voldemort is back. It's an all-out war. How will Dudley be involved? What is gonna happen? What difference will he make? Dudley Dursley and the Deathly Hallows happens now. Enjoy. Welcome back, guys. So let's get straight into it. With the protection being lifted from Harry as he's about to turn 17, the Order of the Phoenix has to take the right precautions to get Harry to the safety of the Burrow. Voldemort's assault on the magical sector of Great Britain is at full scale, and it truly is dark times. Vernon and Petunia are forced to leave the home that they've lived in for years for their own protection. Dudley, having a better relationship with his parents, explains just how dangerous things have gotten and that Harry's right. If the Death Eaters arrive to Privet Drive and find both of them there, they'll be tortured and killed. Too many people have died already, and there is already so much that needs to be done. Dudley's concern for his parents is quite apparent. He has a hand in making sure they're protected and they get as far away as possible from Privet Drive. He agrees to meet the rest of the Order after he gets his parents to safety. "You make sure you come back to me. I've already lost enough," his mother says, not knowing that those words would be her last to Dudley for months. After Dudley makes his way back to the Burrow, he arrives sometime after the others had arrived. It only takes him a brief moment to realise that things hadn't gone to plan. He's deeply saddened and upset by the deaths of Alastor Moody and Hedwig. Molly shows him to his room as he settles in. He's not present for Rufus Scrimgeour's meeting with Harry, Ron and Hermione, as they are receiving their items left to them from Dumbledore's will, but Dudley is actually invited to Bill and Fleur's wedding. As the Ministry falls and the Death Eaters attack the wedding, Dudley apparates with the trio to Grimmauld Place, where they begin to hatch a plan to infiltrate the Ministry. Dudley disguises himself as the Ministry guard as the trio take the forms of their original hosts. Harry steals the locket as he had originally, and they all make their escape. The irony of the situation is that while Dudley was running behind them, still appearing as a guard, it actually looked like he was chasing them, so nobody really knew what was actually happening. As Hermione redirects the Floo Network's apparition to Dean Forest, Dudley lands a good distance away from the rest of the group with a slash across his chest and part of his nose missing. He got splinched, but not as bad as Ron. This is the last thing anyone wanted. It was an instant wake-up call for Harry that it's not just their enemies that can hurt them, but they themselves can also get hurt easily if they don't have the utmost concentration when practicing magic. Ron is in a bad way. Dudley keeps asking him if he's okay, but Ron is in too much shock as we've seen in the original timeline. Hermione uses a small bit of Dittany on Dudley that quickly heals him, but unfortunately it can't do anything about his nose, and he's now left with a closed up stump on the front of his face, something similar to Alastor Moody's appearance. Dudley's first scars from war were now apparent. As Ron recovers and they now take turns wearing the locket, Harry is still uneasy about letting Dudley protect the locket, but eventually relents. Dudley feels an overwhelming rush of emotions when he's got the locket on. It's an anger that makes him want to lash out, and he's not sure why. It makes him realise just how much darkness is in the actual object hanging around his neck. It makes him extremely uneasy, and he's worried when he doesn't feel the anger diminish as he removes the locket from his neck and gives it to Ron for his turn. As Ron wears the locket and its negative evil energy gets the better of him, he lashes out at Harry as he did in the original timeline. Dudley gets to his feet and yells at the top of his voice that quickly grabs Ron's attention. He tells Ron that he knows how it feels to be close to losing family, that he prays his parents aren't tortured by Voldemort in order to get to Harry. This grounds Ron momentarily as he realises he isn't the only one. Ron therefore doesn't abandon Harry in this timeline. He stays, and Harry has the assist he needs when locating the Sword of Gryffindor safely. His relationship with Hermione also doesn't deteriorate to almost breaking point either. Hermione lost an enormous amount of respect for Ron after he left her and Harry at such a crucial time. The most important thing was to continue to find and destroy the remaining Horcruxes. The trouble was destroying them. They still struggled to destroy the actual locket, until Dudley compares the locket to one of Petunia's eggs when making him breakfast. "It's obvious, Harry. The locket. Well, that's the shell. Just like when Mom used to make egg and soldiers. Breaking the shell to get to the goodness of the egg. Oh, I can think of it now. Well, basically we have to open the locket to get to the core. That's the only way we can destroy it. Makes sense if you think about it." Ron then looks at Dudley as if he has 10 heads and says, "Please tell me you didn't just compare the locket of Slytherin to your mum's eggs." He's right though. "We've got to open it," adds Harry. Harry opens the locket, and it foreshows Ron's biggest fear and insecurities as it did originally, but it also shows Dudley's too. Voldemort's voice directs itself at Dudley and says, "All those extra gifts for birthdays, year after year. Your mother's pathetic attempt to prove you weren't second to your cousin, just like she was to her sister. Perhaps that is what you share with your mother. Never enough to be number one." It's at this point Ron blasts through the foggy build-up and drives the blade of the Sword of Gryffindor down on top of the locket, destroying it. The group takes some time to process what has just happened before planning their next move. The trio then asks Dudley to remain behind at the campsite as they go to Xenophilius Lovegoods and warn him to stay sharp as there were snatchers everywhere. Dudley isn't too happy about having to remain behind, but it's important that he does, just in case something goes wrong and he can contact the Order. While events happen as they did at the Lovegood residence, Dudley ends up straying from the campsite as he's grown uneasy and impatient. As he explores the area away from the campsite, he sees Harry, Hermione and Ron running back towards the campsite being chased by snatchers. Dudley begins running in the opposite direction, but is caught almost immediately and rounded up with the rest of the others. It's only when one of the Death Eaters notices the uncanny resemblance to that of Harry Potter do they take their captives to Malfoy Manor, where they're brought before Bellatrix Lestrange. At the manor, Draco identifies him as Harry Potter's cousin, which excites Bellatrix immediately as Vernon is still unrecognizable with his stinging hex. Bellatrix beats and tortures Dudley for information while threatening his parents, and goes between physically interrogating him and Hermione. Dobby arrives as he had originally and rescues everyone. At Shell College, Dudley is pretty beaten up and in a bad way. He's really in bad shape. Bellatrix did quite a number on him. He needs rest, so he doesn't join the trio on their journey to Gringotts Bank, even though he insists that he can travel and he's okay. Anyway, as Harry, Ron and Hermione infiltrate Gringotts, Dudley discovers what's been going on at Hogwarts in terms of the mistreating of the students. He knows that there's going to be a huge battle sooner or later. Refusing to reside in Shell College any longer as he's healed well enough, he helps mobilize the school along with the rest of the students and teachers. Dudley is nervous and frightened at the same time, because he knows he'll really have to fight, and fight to kill. He's never been in a proper duel in his entire life. He knows his wand and what it's capable of. He's consistently thinking that if he narrows his attacking spells down to one or maybe two different spells, and maybe attacks in stealth mode from behind corners, basically anything that doesn't require one-on-one, then he feels like he has the best chance of survival. He can do this with the use of Harry's Cloak of Invisibility, something Harry gladly gives him. Dudley doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be killed, to be hurt in any way. He's scared. He's grown quite a lot, but it's only natural to be afraid when stared in the face by death. He uses his stealth plan to great effect when the Slytherin students try to grab Harry after Voldemort's ultimatum. Pansy Parkinson is encouraging everyone to grab Harry when out of nowhere, "Petrificus Totalis!" and Pansy literally drops to the floor. Dudley emerges from under the cloak and says, "I don't think anyone will be taking Harry tonight. What say you, Harry?" Harry smiles and nods at his cousin. He then goes off to find a diadem as Dudley heads with the others to prepare for the battle to resume, unaware that Harry went to the Forbidden Forest sometime later. Upon seeing his cousin appearing lifeless while being carried by Hagrid, Dudley feels a gut-wrenching churn in his stomach that turns into sheer delight when Harry jumps from Hagrid's arms. He continues fighting in stealth mode, pinpointing Death Eaters and taking them out one by one using his cousin's cloak, and makes his way to the Great Hall to witness the final battle on Voldemort's downfall. In the epilogue, Dudley's children weren't born with a magical gene, something he says he's actually quite happy about. He wants them to have a life away from the wizarding world, that despite the good times he's had, he still associates magic with a lot of misery. He rarely used his wand again as he settled in the Muggle world with his wife and children.